Brandy Peters brutally shot. They found Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante. One of them shot.
Just give him back to me again, please. Don't harm my son.
I'm thinking that I deserve death. If they feel I'm guilty, then they should sentence me to death.
On a quiet afternoon in March 2021, shoppers at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, were going about their normal routines when the sound of shots broke the calm. Witnesses recalled confusion at first. Some thought something had been dropped until more shots followed and panic spread. Customers and employees began rushing toward the back of the store. One customer who had come in for a drink and snacks remembered everyone moving quickly but in an almost orderly line, urging each other to go. They pushed through the storerooms, out the cargo bay, and under a delivery truck before running up a hill to safety.
Yeah, hi Jim. This gentleman is telling us that he was in the store. First off, can you tell me who you are, sir?
Yeah, my name is Ryan Borowski. I live in Boulder.
Tell me what you were doing and what you experienced inside.
I just went in for a soda and some chips and kind of changed my directions and heard, one loud bang. Thought somebody just dropped something, an employee or something, and then another. And then by the third one, everybody was running. We ran to the back of the store and, found our way into the employee back of house. Some people were kind of running into the pantry. Employees were telling people, this is the exit. We went out the cargo bay and jumped underneath the loading truck that was there and ran up the back of the hill. And now my car is still here, so that's the only reason I'm hanging out. But yeah, it seemed like it happened at this entrance here on the east side, and I was closer to the west side, so I can't believe it's happening in Boulder, honestly.
And how many people were around? Was it a pretty busy time here inside the store when this happened?
We weren't tripping over each other, but we were single file, just, somebody had their hand on my back, I had my hand on somebody's back, and we were just saying, go, 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 run. When we got to the back of the store, there were employees who still didn't know what was going on, and we just told them to run, But yeah, I'd say it was decently crowded, but thankfully not too crowded.
And when you were trying to make your way to safety, did you guys see anything involving anyone injured, anything that was concerning to you? After
the second shot, I was already in an aisle, and I think it happened up by the cash registers. So yeah, I had told my wife I wasn't close enough to be a hero or anything, so just at that point it was just run, get out of there, tell everybody to leave. And yeah, that's what we had to do.
Another shopper near the meat section described hearing a strange, rapid noise, then joining a rush of people who jumped down from a loading dock and fled.
Well, I didn't see anything. It's what I heard. But I was in the back of the store toward the meat, and all of a sudden I heard I think we all, like 5 people around me, heard something that sounded, in retrospect, it sounded like a misfire. Didn't know what it was at the time. But then, within a second or two, there was just a cadence of pop, pop. But it was more of a full, sound that I'd never heard before. And it was obvious it was a very dangerous situation. And so I was near the front of a stampede that just headed out and didn't know where a door would be in the back. We just went flying through those doors. And we all just rushed and jumped about 5 feet down from the loading dock and just ran for our lives.
One grandfather shared how his son-in-law had brought his 2 daughters to the pharmacy for a vaccine appointment. When the chaos began, they ran upstairs and hid in a closet, whispering texts to their mother until police came through the roof to guide them out.
I got the call from my daughter that my grandchildren and my son-in-law walked into the pharmacy for him to get a COVID-19 shot, and the came in, the woman in front of them. They ran upstairs or hiding in a coat closet for the last hour and trying to stay in contact with my daughter. They're okay. They just are now out the back. They had, about half a dozen stormtroopers, half a dozen cops came in through the roof, got them, and then told them, stay quiet, and they're okay. This is not okay with me. And this is put in a big pitch for control. Because this is, when it's your family, you feel it. What's more precious, and then I get really angry. Every city is susceptible, but there's a way in which I would think that, well, this wasn't going to happen in Boulder. This has got to stop. Every week in the United States, there's a... Now it's our turn, and that should never be repeated anywhere.
Within minutes, officers arrived. Among them was Officer Eric Talley, a father of 7 who ran inside to help. He did not survive, later remembered as a hero who put the safety of others above his own.
I brought flowers and candles, 10 candles for each victim. I felt I had to pay my respects to the officer and all the other people who have lost their lives.
He has 7 children, and I hope they know that their dad was such a hero.
The suspect was eventually cornered. Wounded and disoriented, he surrendered to police, leaving behind his gear and weapons. He was taken into custody and later transported to jail.
It makes you realize it can be anyone, anywhere, and you just feel terrible for the families.
In the aftermath, Boulder learned that 10 lives had been taken, from a 20-year-old young man to a 65-year-old retiree, along with Officer Talley. Each victim had a story, friends, families, and futures that were cut short in a place where people should have felt safe. What followed were years of legal delays as the courts evaluated the suspect's mental competency. Families of the victims endured long waits, hoping for accountability.
It bothered me when the defense attorney said there are no words when describing the pain and suffering. There are words, so many words to choose from, words that span language barriers. How about, I'm sorry? If we've never been denying he did it, then where's an apology? An iota of remorse from the defendant or his family would have gone a long way.
By 2024, a jury finally heard the case. The defense argued mental illness, but after brief deliberations, the jury found the suspect guilty on all charges.
They had no instruction for us in this type of a case. And thankfully so, because one would wish that you wouldn't need instruction on how to do a sentencing in this type of case. But unfortunately, that day has come that we need to start training judges on how you address so many victims of such a horrendous crime.
The judge sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms without parole, plus additional years for other crimes. Today, Boulder continues to honor the victims. Memorials, vigils, and the voices of witnesses and survivors keep their memory alive, reminding all that even in tragedy, compassion and unity can shine through. In mid-August 2025, a troubling case began in Yucaipa, California. Emmanuel Haro was reported missing by his mother, Rebecca Haro. She told authorities that she had been in a parking lot outside a sporting goods store when a stranger attacked her, and when she regained consciousness, her son was gone.
Well, and I didn't see anything, and I woke up on the floor.
The very next day, Rebecca appeared emotional in front of cameras, pleading for the safe return of her son.
Just give him back to me again. Please don't harm my son. Please, I'm begging you. Please, God, please.
At her side was her husband, Jake Haro. Together, they urged the public for help, asking anyone with information to come forward.
Please come forward and bring him back to me.
Please just give him back to us. will forgive you.
Flyers were soon posted, and community members joined in the search effort. But behind the scenes, investigators with the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department noticed troubling inconsistencies in the parents' story. As detectives pressed for details, cooperation from Rebecca and Jake faded. Before long, authorities concluded that the kidnapping they described had not actually happened. Search warrants were executed at the Haro family's home in Cabazon. Deputies, detectives, and K-9 teams scoured the property and nearby areas, collecting surveillance footage and other potential evidence. Meanwhile, the community began to question the parents' version of events, especially after Jake was overheard speaking about Emmanuel in the past tense during an early interview.
He was a healthy baby. He was crawling, he was kicking, he was playing with his toys.
Roughly a week after the disappearance, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Both Jake and Rebecca Haro were arrested on suspicion of murder. They were booked into jail without bail, and social services removed their daughter from the household. Authorities later conducted searches in remote areas, including rugged terrain near Moreno Valley along the 60 freeway. Jake, in custody and dressed in a red jail jumpsuit, was escorted to the site to assist investigators, but no trace of Emmanuel was found. Despite exhaustive searches, the boy's remains have never been recovered. Prosecutors moved forward with formal charges accusing the parents of murder and filing a false police report. In court, Jake and Rebecca appeared shackled and said little.
Yes, Your Honor.
Their arraignment was postponed so that attorneys could be assigned, and bail was set at $1 million each.
We cannot represent both, so for today we simply continued the arraignment. At that point, hopefully we'll have a police report, run a conflict check, and we'll decide to keep one, and then we'll conflict on the other.
As the legal process moved ahead, community members gathered for vigils and created memorials for Emmanuel.
Heart-wrenching for everybody. I'm a mother and a grandmother, so it's been emotional. I've been following it since it started, and it's taken a toll on me. I've been having a hard time sleeping at night and just trying to keep up with the updates.
And then when you found out this morning that they were arrested, accused
I
of
was
murder.
shaking. I was shaking.
Goosebumps. All up and down my arms, my legs, goosebumps, because I had a feeling.
Poor baby. I have kids of my own. Shame on him. I just feel bad for him every time I think about it.
This really hit home to me because I'm also a mother of 4. So to see that somebody could have felt unloving to a child like that, to me is very utterly disgusting.
Many expressed heartbreak, struggling to comprehend how such a tragedy could unfold. For them, it was not only the loss of a boy's life, but also the loss of trust and hope that he would be found safe. To this day, Emmanuel's body has not been located. Investigators believe he is no longer alive, and the case remains active as prosecutors prepare for trial. In November 2010, the city of Tallahassee woke up to a tragedy that later became one of Florida's most talked about murder cases. Brandy Peters, a 27-year-old mother, lived with her twin daughters Tamia and Tanaya and her young son Javonte. Javonte's father, Henry Segura, had been in a complicated relationship with Brandy. Though they were no longer together, they stayed in contact because of their son. Segura had fallen behind on court-ordered payments to support his daughters and son, owing more than $20,000. Around that same time, he was hoping to take a high-paying welding job overseas, but his financial record made him ineligible. Investigators later said this financial pressure was one of the reasons he may have wanted to confront Brandy. On November 20th, 2010, concern grew when Brandy's friends and family couldn't reach her. A family friend went to check on her home and discovered something terribly wrong. Police were called to the scene, where they found Brandy, her daughters, and son dead. The scene was described as deeply tragic, leaving investigators struggling to understand how such violence could happen inside a family home. Detectives began piecing together the timeline. They found that Brandy's phone activity had stopped the previous night at around 8:21 p.m., marking the possible window of the crime. When questioned, Henry Segura told police he was at home the entire night. But when investigators checked his phone records, they discovered that he had used 2 different phones, one of which he had never mentioned. Data from that second phone placed him near Brandy's home around the time of the murders. Forensic teams carefully processed the house, collecting every possible piece of evidence. One key finding was a DNA mixture on a grab bar near the bathtub, which matched Segura's genetic profile. Combined with his inconsistent statements and financial motive, investigators began to focus on him as their prime suspect. Segura was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because on November 20th, 2010, law enforcement officers responded to 908 Saddle Creek Run. This is the home of Brandy Peters, her twins, Tamaya and Tanaya Peters, and her son, Javante Segura. Javante Segura also is the son of Henry Segura, the accused in this particular case. What the officers found when they arrived, Brandy Peters brutally shot and beaten. In the back room, they found Tamaya, Tanaya, and Javante in the bathtub. One of them shot, 2 of them drowned. And what the evidence is going to show you is that Henry Segura is responsible for the murders. You're going to hear throughout the course of this that he was interviewed by Tallahassee Police Department on 2 different occasions, days apart. First one was to notify them of the death of his son, and the second was follow-up. And what he did is he lied to law enforcement. He said, I was not there, I was at home the entire time. Tallahassee Police Department did their investigation, realized he was lying, called him in for a second interview to clarify. I was at home all the time, checked my cell phone records. They say I was there. But he made a mistake. He thought he could pull one over the eyes of the Tallahassee Police Department. What they did is they found out he had a separate phone number that he didn't tell them about. And what they did when they checked that cell phone record is they determined he was in fact there at the time that Brandy Peters and the kids were killed. And it goes farther from there. So the question is, once we make the determination what the evidence is going to show you, that Henry Segura had the motive, he had a means, and he had the opportunity to commit these murders, and he did in fact commit them. The next question is, how did we get there?
Somebody phone going on. Let's not interrupt court, please.
As I said, law enforcement officers responded to the Saddle Creek Run home on November 20th, 2010. This home is located over by the fairgrounds, Capitol Stadium, Tram Road, Paul Russell Road, South Monroe Street. And there's the 4-point area right here. Law enforcement officers respond, they get a call. It was actually Artron Timmons who went up there first to do a check because his mom calls him and tells him to go look, so they haven't heard anything from Brandy Peters that day. He walks up and sees outside the home. Calls law enforcement. Officer Jernigan, Officer Kidd respond first and foremost, and they approach the home. They go into the home, they are able to force entry by breaking a window, and they realized what was happening there. They're later joined by Sean Wyman, Officer of Tallahassee Police Department, and they go into the home and they found what you've already seen. What you're going to hear next, of course, is that they withdraw from the house. Once they clear the house, make sure nobody's still alive, make sure nobody's still hiding in the house. They withdraw from the house. They secure the scene. This is the home there on Saddle Creek Run. Secure it with tape. You can see here the window that they had to break in order to gain entry to the home. And they contact the Criminal Investigative Division of Tallahassee Police Department. Investigator Mark Lewis is assigned to be the primary lead investigator of this case. The lead investigator is kind of like the head coach of a football team, or any other team for that matter. And the fact that he doesn't necessarily do all the investigative aspects of it, but he's kind of the leader of them, and he assigns his assistant coaches, if you will, to do different roles throughout the course of the investigation. You're going to hear that crime scene investigators were called. I know we talked a little bit about CSI shows and stuff like that, but they are, in fact, real-life crime scene investigators. Annie Pressey is the primary investigator for this particular case from Crime Scene. April DeBrava is another investigator that's assigned to the Criminal Investigative Division. And what her role is to be a liaison between the crime scene investigators as they're processing the entire crime. They, of course, have training to do so. You're going to hear that there's a lot of blood in this. Throughout the entire house, they process the entire house room by room by room. April DeBrava's role is to do a liaison, to look from things from an investigative standpoint as an investigator rather than a crime scene specialist. She also reports back, of course, as I said, she would be one of the assistant coaches for Mark Lewis. And they do, in fact, process the scene. They look for the evidence in the house. They look for evidence around the victims, and, of course, outside the home. And they start asking questions. They start asking questions to the family member. Who does she know? Why is this important? It's important to know who she knows because of the brutality of this. Law enforcement suspects that it's somebody she knew because of the brutality of it. So they want to know who she knows, who's possibly responsible, who can give them leads as to who she may have been seen with the night before, things along those lines. They start asking questions about time frames. Again, she's found early in the morning. Time frames, when the last time somebody's seen them. When you saw them last, what were they doing? Things along those lines. General information, habits, time to eat, time the kids go to bed, things along those lines. And what they find out is that she does in fact have her cell phone on her all the time, much like most of us do. Has the phone on her all the time, constantly using it. They find out that she was last seen the night before in the late afternoon, early evening hours. That the twins, one of the twins was and Javante actually were seen with Burger King wrappers shortly after they had eaten Burger King, or appeared to be shortly after they had eaten Burger King. They talked to friends, find out when she was last talked to. Last talked to again, late afternoon, early evening hours. Of course, they find out how the bodies were discovered. As I mentioned earlier, Artron's mom calls over there, can't get Brandy to respond. It's out of ordinary because of the fact that she usually responds to her cell phone. And she sends her son over there, at which point he comes back and reports to law enforcement. They find out possible boyfriend she's with. Does she have any boyfriends, family members? And they also find out about the fathers of the children. And when they find out it's the father of the children, for Tamaya and Tanaya, the twins, is Antonio Anthony. And the father of Javante Segura is, in fact, Henry Segura. It's obviously important because you got to let them know about what happened. What they also do is they take a look at Brandy's cell phone. Try and see if they can narrow some things down. Who's she been talking to last? They find out around 6:11 to 6:15, it's a call between Brandy and her mom. You get a text from 6:53 from Cece Timmons, Artron Timmons' mom, that we just talked about. They also find out that 6:53 text is the last active communication on Brandy's phone. These are terms you're going to start hearing. You're probably going to learn a lot more about cell phones than you ever thought possible. But there's a difference. Active communication is one in which the recipient of the phone, Brandy in this particular case, is sending something out. That is an active communication. It means they're actively participating in the conversation. There are also passive events. Passive events are things that are incoming. Someone calling and leaving a voicemail, calling a text message with no response, things along those lines. And what they find out, of course, is that 6:53 was the last active communication. At 7:13 is a passive event, incoming. 7:49, another passive event. And finally, at 8:21, a routed event. And what you're going to learn is a routed event is one that happens when the phone is shut down, when it can't communicate with a tower. Battery removed, turned off, something along those lines. And that 8:21, the phone has been powered down at 8:21 and never heard from again. And you're going to see an analysis of Brandy's phone. And this here, whoops. And this is that, in fact, analysis. And what you can see here is we're enlarging the time frame, and it starts 1 week prior to the homicide. And these are all the communications that she has during that course of that week. Both active and passive. But you can see it's in constant use. Look at the time frame. Every couple of seconds, every couple of minutes, she's using that phone constantly. She's on it constantly. Now, each one of these lines are going to be later explained to you what they all mean by Chris Corbett. He's going to explain what each one of these lines are. But right here, what we're talking about is the time and date. And that's it. It just stops. And it stops, and it's never heard from again at 8:21. So that begs the question, why did it stop? And why is that 6:53 the last active communication? Is that the time period in which the murder occurred? You're of course going to hear that there was an autopsy conducted. Autopsy of both Brandy and the children. And you're going to find and hear that there was food that was found in the stomach of Tamaya and Tanaya. You're going to hear from Dr. Flanagan, who was the autopsy medical examiner, about the time frames that were involved. And it would be a couple of hours, if you roughly. Can't hammer down an exact time. Again, this isn't CSI TV. But the general idea would be within a couple of hours of their death, they'd eat. Again, you go back to Artron Timmons' testimony about the fact that he last saw them eating Burger King in the late afternoon or early evening hours of that 19th. And that is in fact consistent with the Brandy's phone becoming inactive at that time period. In addition to that, you'll see photographs in the crime scene. There's an open food canister there on the table. Spoon's still in it. Again, eating patterns, roughly early evening, or late afternoon, early evening. Consistent. So at this point, law enforcement has determined who she knows, who she communicates, who's the father of her children, possibly what time the deaths occurred, and they start looking, trying to figure out who may have possibly had a motive. Law enforcement training experience. Typically, in a crime scene such as this, you're talking about money, love, jealousy, things along those lines. That's usually what you primarily look at first and foremost. Who has the means? Who's got the ability to do this? Because of the crime scene, the brutality of this, who's got the ability to do this with the strength that it would cause? Because you're going to hear from the medical examiner that part of the skull was actually crushed. The bone was crushed. Who's got that kind of strength? Murder weapon. What was the murder weapon? You're going to hear from Boulder Department law enforcement analyst Jeff Foggy that in fact what happened here is a .32 caliber, most likely. 32 calibers are interesting. You're going to hear that 32 calibers actually have two different kinds of bullets that go with it. There are 32 caliber long and 32 caliber short. And what you're going to hear is that if somebody puts the wrong ammunition in a different gun, they use, for instance, in this case, a 32 short when it should be a 32 long, the weapon will fire, but it doesn't fire right. In other words, it doesn't gain the velocity that is needed to actually penetrate a skull and do the damage you would normally think of regarding the bullet. Then we go back to Dr. Flanagan's autopsy. And what we find is that that's exactly what happened here. That these bullets that entered Brandy didn't do so with the velocity you normally would expect. They actually didn't penetrate bone in some way, in some instances. What that tells us is that whoever it is may not have known quite how to use a gun properly, wasn't real familiar with firearms. So the question is, murder weapon, who had one? But at the same time, just because you have one doesn't mean you necessarily know how to use it right. Who could that be? Who had the opportunity? Who was there? Who had access to the kids? Who had access to Brandy, to the home? You're going to hear that this was not a forced entry. The door wasn't kicked in. It was kicked in eventually by law enforcement, but when they respond, nobody kicked the door in. Nobody forced their entry. So somebody was led into this home. You're going to find Henry Segura. Initial interview, notify him because of a child. Look for nonverbal cues, emotional, lack of emotion, deceptions, and of course they apply common sense in conducting these interviews. You can have an opportunity to see it. Henry Segura's told his son is killed. Doesn't show any emotion. Now we talked about that in opening statements. Not everybody grieves in the same way. Didn't show any emotions. Again, I was home on the 19th. Was there all night. Wasn't me. Good enough. Told law enforcement to check his phone records. He gives a phone number of 5. That's my phone number. Check it. Phone records say I was home. So the next day, he went in the morning. He went to his friend Silas Thornton's house. When officers asked, he gave a phone number for Silas Thornton, 408-8669. So now there's a investigative team division meeting, and they're talking, and they're sitting around talking. Chris Corbett, you're going to hear from, he's a phone analyst. He's the one that's going to talk to you about what cell phones can and can't do, and how it relates into this particular case. You'll hear a little bit more about that in a second. So as they're sitting around their meeting and they're sharing notes about what they've learned, what he says is that 408-8669 is in contact with Brandy Peters all day long on the 19th. This is the number that Henry Segura says belonged to Silas Thornton. So what does law enforcement do? They go down and interview Silas Thornton. Lives down in the South Choppy area, in McCullough County, south of town. When they interview Silas Thornton, what he says is, yeah, it was my phone. It got damaged at one point. It got wet. I put it in a bag of rice. I was with Henry Segura at the time, and I was working. They're both welders. I was with Henry Segura during the time period. I put it in a bag of rice. It was his suggestion to do so. And he left that phone in Henry Segura's truck. And then from that point on, Henry Segura used that phone. Not Silas Thornton. Henry Segura. Didn't tell law enforcement that back on the 19th or the 20th when he was interviewed. So now we have two phone numbers in play. We have the one that Henry Segura says is mine, the one that he says is Thornton's, that we've now learned is Henry Segura's. And what we find out when we analyze those is with regard to that 408-8669 number, at 11:30 a.m. there's a phone call from that phone to Brandy. But in that phone, for some reason, star 67 was used. Star 67 is the function that you use in order to hide who is calling. But she answered the phone, and they talked for 56 minutes, clearly indicating it's someone she knows and has a conversation with. Consistent, once again, with Henry Segura. Between 118 and 128, series of calls to Brandy. Again, star 67 used for some reason, blocking his caller ID. But she obviously knows him because she talked to him just a little while ago on that same phone number. (2:13), another phone call. 2 minutes, 35 seconds. Again, star 67 used, trying to hide it. Deception. At 2:19, so again, 2:13, almost 3 minutes on a phone call. Right afterward, at 2:19, she sends a text number to 509-4380. This is the phone number that Henry Segura says was mine. What does that say? The evidence shows in this particular case that this phone number, this phone call at 213, from the phone number that Henry Segura says wasn't his, it's Silas Thornton's, that he was keeping secret, that he kept using star 67 on to hide his identity, and that phone number, she sends a text to his regular number and says, "Did you hang up on me?" Tells you that phone call was Henry Segura, and that she then used his normal number to question about why he hung up. He hung up on me? What does that tell you? 219, they fighting? On day of murder? Shortly thereafter, there's another phone call from 408-869 to Brandy where he uses star 67 again. Again, hiding. Once again, that's a phone number that Henry Segura gave to law enforcement as Silas Thornton's phone number. But law enforcement investigates further. And they find multiple friends, Silas Thornton, Haro and Miss Hawthorne Smith, that all say, "I communicate with Henry Segura on that phone number around the times of the murder, those dates surrounding the murder." So they have independent confirmation from not only Silas Thornton, but also other friends and girlfriends of Henry Segura that that is in fact the number that he utilizes, that 408-8669 number that he says wasn't mine. It was Silas Thornton's phone number. Deception. Micro-emotions, deception. So now the next question is, was there motive? We've already seen the 219 phone call or text message, "Did you hang up on me?" So there's some sort of fighting going on between the two of them. Motive usually involves, as I said, money, love, relationship, jealousy, things along those lines. And what we find out is shortly there before this murder occurred, Henry Segura is behind on his court payments of over $20,000. $20,000, a lot of money. We're also going to hear from a friend of his, lifelong friend of his, who's going to come in and testify. And what he's going to tell you is that he's also a welder at the time. And that they were discussing, he and Henry were talking about getting a job over in Afghanistan. Lots of money to be made over in Afghanistan during this time period, doing welding and things, 6-figure jobs. A lot of money to be made. But to go to Afghanistan, you have to have a visa from the United States and Afghanistan to travel to and from. The problem with that is he can't get one if he owes over $2,500 in child support. So it's not only the $20,000 in child support in arrears, but now that child support for Javante stands in the way of making 6-figure salaries and traveling to do so. Is there means?
His first trial, held in 2017, ended in a mistrial after jurors couldn't reach a unanimous decision, most reportedly leaning toward acquittal. In 2019, he was retried. This time, the jury found him guilty on all counts.
Do you wish them to make an argument in opposition to the death penalty?
No, I did not.
And what is your thinking on this?
I'm thinking that whoever's responsible for these crimes deserve the death penalty. If they feel I'm guilty, then they should sentence me to death.
Segura continued to claim he was innocent. His defense team argued that the investigation had been flawed and that detectives had ignored other potential suspects, including possible links to organized crime. Through all of this, Segura's fiancée stood by his side. She believed in his innocence and spoke publicly about how the verdict had devastated their family.
Very shortly after the verdict was received, there was an outpour to the family from so many areas, from so many different people coming from so many different directions. And the consensus was that this was injustice served on a platter. He is innocent, and the jury got it wrong. The prosecution had nothing, the state had nothing. And they just could not understand how, if the jury saw what viewers saw, how they came up with the verdict of guilty.
And I have to know, how is Henry doing right now?
Henry is doing well, in spite of the circumstances. He's very strong. Something like this would probably break the average person mentally, but his faith is strong. You know, he has a very strong faith in God, and a very close connection with his family, with his mom and his sister and everyone. And so he's doing well under the circumstances.
And how are Henry's children doing?
His children are doing well. When he was arrested, it was very hard. It was very difficult. The initial shock of it all. And it took time for things to, I think, get back to some sense of normalcy. They're all thriving, you know, academically. All of them are just super smart, super talented, and they're all doing well. But they could be doing a lot better if their dad was home. You know, as well as they're doing, there still is a void that nothing can fill but his presence.
What all has Henry missed out on over the years with his family and his kids?
He's missed, when you say what has he missed out, what has he not missed out? That would be the question. He's missed out on father-daughter dancing. He's missed out on football games. He's missed out on National Honor Society inductions. He's missed out on different galas and, you know, contests that the kids have been in. And he missed out on telling his sister goodbye. He lost one of his sisters. She passed away in 2016, and he didn't get a chance to say goodbye. His grandfather passed away since he's been incarcerated. He did not get a chance to say goodbye. His mother's had a few surgeries since he's been away. He has not been able to physically be there for her as he would have been and would have liked to be. So it's not a matter of what he's missed out on. He's missed out on everything, every birthday, every, you know, weddings, birth. He has nieces that he has never met. Great nieces and great nephews he's never met. You know, family that he hasn't seen. He's missed out on quite a lot. And the sad part is that once he's home, and I don't say if, but once he is home, you still can't get that back. Everyone has to just kind of pick up from that moment and move forward, but he'll never get any of that back. The kids won't get it back. He won't get it back. And that's the sad part, that the state TPD, you know, the police department, the state of Florida, they all could have done their job, like really got in there to find out who really did this, and he wouldn't have missed a beat of anything. And yet, because they were seeking a conviction and not actually seeking the truth, an innocent man has missed out on almost 10 years with his family, with his kids, with his mother, you know, and he's lost time and lost family.
Prosecutors sought the death penalty, but the jury instead sentenced him to life in prison. The appeals court later reviewed the case in 2021, but upheld the convictions, ruling that the evidence was sufficient for a jury to find him guilty. More than a decade later, Henry Segura remains in prison, maintaining that he did not. The afternoon of September 10th, 2025, began like any other campus event at Utah Valley University. Conservative activist and Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk had come to speak as part of his American Comeback Tour. Hundreds gathered to hear him talk about politics, faith, and culture, unaware that the day would end in tragedy. During the event, a single rang out, sending the crowd into chaos. Kirk was rushed to a nearby hospital, where he later died from his injuries. Within hours, police began a massive manhunt across Utah County, reviewing security footage, tracing vehicles, and analyzing digital clues. 2 days later, on September 12th, authorities arrested 22-year-old Tyler James Robinson. Investigators said Robinson's family recognized him from publicly released images and contacted police. Detectives later confirmed evidence linking him to the crime, including digital communications and forensic materials. By September 16th, prosecutors had filed formal charges.
Mr. Robinson, for count 1, aggravated murder, a capital felony in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-5-202, in that on September 10th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant, Tyler James Robinson, intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Charlie Kirk under the following circumstances. The defendant knowingly created a great risk of death to another individual other than Charlie Kirk and the defendant. Notice conviction of this offense may carry the death penalty or pursuant to Utah Code 76-3-207.7, a mandatory term of imprisonment for life without parole or an indeterminate term of not less than 25 years, and that may be for life. Victim targeting enhancement in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-3-203.14 sub 2. Tyler James Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because of Tyler James Robinson's belief or perception regarding Charlie Kirk's political expression. Notice if the trier of fact finds beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim targeting enhancement applies, the sentencing judge or the Board of Pardons and Parole shall consider the defendant's selection of the victim as an aggravating factor. Violent offense committed in the presence of a child aggravating factor, the sentencing judge or the Board of Pardons and Parole shall consider as an aggravating factor in their deliberations that the defendant committed a violent criminal offense in the presence of a child. Count 2, felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, a first-degree felony, in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-11-210 sub 2 and 3C, in that on September 10th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant Tyler James Robinson discharged a firearm in the direction of Charlie Kirk, knowing or having reason to believe that Charlie Kirk may be endangered by the discharge of the firearm and that the act caused serious bodily injury to Charlie Kirk. Victim targeting enhancement in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-3-203.14 sub 2. Tyler James Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because Tyler James Robinson's belief or perception regarding Charlie Kirk's political expression. Notice if the trier of fact finds beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim targeting enhancement applies, the sentencing judge or the Board of Pardons and Parole shall consider the defendant's selection of the victim as an aggravating factor. Violent offense committed in the presence of a child aggravating factor. The sentencing judge or the Board of Pardons and Parole shall consider an aggravating factor in their deliberations that the defendant committed a violent offense in the presence of a child. Count 3, obstruction of justice, a second-degree felony in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-8-306 sub 2, in that on September 10th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant Tyler James Robinson, with intent to hinder, delay, or prevent the investigation, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, or pursuant to any person regarding conduct that constitutes a criminal offense, conceal or remove the firearm used to shoot Charlie Kirk, and the conduct that constitutes an offense would be a capital felony or a first-degree felony. Count 4, obstruction of justice, a second-degree felony in violation of Utah Code 76-8-306 sub 2, in that on or about September 11th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant, Tyler James Robinson, with an intent to hinder, delay, or prevent the investigation, apprehension, prosecution, conviction, or punishment of any person regarding conduct that constitutes a criminal offense, destroyed, concealed, or removed the clothing he wore during the shooting, and the conduct that constitutes an offense would be a capital felony or first-degree felony. Count 5, tampering with a witness, a third-degree felony in violation of Utah Code annotated 76-8-508, in that on or about September 10th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant, Tyler James Robinson, believed that an official proceeding or investigation was pending or about to be instituted or intended to prevent an official proceeding or investigation, and attempted to induce or otherwise cause his roommate to withhold testimony, information, a document, or an item, to wit, directing his roommate to delete incriminating text messages. Count 6, tampering with a witness, a third-degree felony in violation of Utah Code Annotated 76-8-508, in that on or about September 11th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant, Tyler James Robinson, believed that an official proceeding or investigation was pending or about to be instituted or intended to prevent an official proceeding or investigation, and attempted to induce or otherwise cause his roommate to withhold testimony or information, to wit, directing his roommate to stay silent if the police questioned the roommate. Count 7, violent offense committed in the presence of a child, a Class A misdemeanor in violation of Utah Code Annotated 76-3-203.10 sub 2 and 76-3-203.14 sub 3a little double I, in that on or about September 10th, 2025 in Utah County, the defendant, Tyler James Robinson, committed criminal homicide in the physical presence of a child younger than 14 years of age, with knowledge that a child was present and that may have been seen or heard the commission of the criminal homicide. Victim targeting enhancement in violation of Utah Code Annotated 76-3-203.14 sub 2, Tyler James Robinson intentionally selected Charlie Kirk because of Tyler James Robinson's belief or perception regarding Charlie Kirk's political expression. That concludes reading the information.
Robinson faced 7 counts, including aggravated murder, discharging a firearm causing serious injury, 2 counts of obstruction of justice, 2 counts of witness tampering, and a misdemeanor for committing a violent offense in the presence of a child. Prosecutors allege the crime was politically motivated, claiming Robinson targeted Kirk because of his public political beliefs. At his first virtual court appearance before Judge Tony Graff, Robinson appeared calm but said little. The judge reviewed his financial declaration and determined he could not afford an attorney. A capital qualified public defender was appointed to represent him. Prosecutor Chad Grunander, joined by a team from the Utah County Attorney's Office, formally informed the court that the state would seek the death penalty.
Well, I want to go through the qualifications
Absolutely.
for indigency, but that is my intent, Mr. Scortis.
Very well.
And I thank you for being here. So, Mr. Robinson, you have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, the court can appoint an attorney to represent you. I have reviewed your declaration of financial status and find that you are indigent. I'm provisionally appointing a Rule 8 qualified attorney to represent you on your case, Mr. Robinson. Along with their filing of their appearance of counsel, the assigned attorneys must file declarations with the court that outline their qualifications under Rule 8 and Rule 8C, under Rule 8B and Rule 8C for counsel appointment in a case where death may be a sentencing option. I'm ordering that those declarations be filed prior to the next hearing date, which is set for September 29th at 10 a.m. Mr. Robinson, I also wish to inform you of your right against self-incrimination. Anything that you say in court today could be used against you, and we want to protect your constitutional rights. Mr. Robinson, at this time, you will remain in custody without bail.
The prosecution requested a protective order for Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's wife, to prevent any contact from the defendant, which the judge immediately granted. After reading the full list of charges allowed, Judge Graff ordered that Robinson remain in custody without bail. According to court filings, Robinson allegedly discussed his plans with a roommate and later sent messages expressing regret. Investigators claim he tried to hide evidence by discarding his clothing and instructing others to delete incriminating texts. In the weeks since, additional narrative and public attention have magnified the case. As of now, the case remains in its pre-trial stages. Robinson has not yet entered a plea. The courts and prosecution are preparing for what is expected to be a highly contentious capital trial. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.